Sarah Martinez had always been the invisible girl in her high school. While other students chatted loudly in hallways and raised their hands eagerly in class, she preferred the safety of silence. Her teachers barely noticed her, classmates forgot her name, and even her own family sometimes overlooked her presence at the dinner table. At 17, Sarah was small for her age, with dark hair that she kept pulled back in a simple ponytail, and clothes that seemed designed to help her blend into the background. She had learned early that being noticed often meant being picked on, so she had perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight. The only place Sarah felt truly comfortable was in her grandfather's old workshop behind their house. Roberto Martinez had been a decorated Marine sniper during the Vietnam War, though he rarely spoke about those days. Instead, he channeled his expertise into precision work, fixing watches and building intricate wooden models that required steady hands and perfect focus. Sarah had spent countless hours in that workshop since she was 8 years old, watching her grandfather's weathered hands perform miracles of precision. He taught her patience, how to control her breathing, and the importance of stillness. While other kids played video games or scrolled through social media, Sarah learned to appreciate the meditation of precise, careful work. Her grandfather had also taught her to shoot, starting with an old pellet gun when she was 12. They would set up targets in the backyard, and Sarah discovered she had a natural gift for it. Her grandfather never made a big deal about her accuracy, simply nodding with approval when she hit her marks and offering gentle corrections when she missed. When Roberto passed away 2 years ago, Sarah felt like she had lost the only person who truly understood her. The workshop became her sanctuary, a place where she could feel connected to him and practice the skills he had taught her. She continued target shooting alone, gradually improving her accuracy with the rifle he had left her. Now, in her senior year, Sarah had exactly 3 friends and spent most of her free time either in the workshop or at the local library. She had good grades but never spoke up in class. Teachers described her as a sweet, quiet girl, in the generic way adults talk about students they don't really know. Her parents, Maria and Carlos, were loving but busy. They ran a small restaurant that demanded all their attention, leaving Sarah largely to raise herself. They were proud of her good behavior and decent grades, but they had never really discovered what made their daughter special. The shooting range was Sarah's secret. Once a week, she would take the city bus to the public range 20 minutes from home where she practiced with her grandfather's rifle. The range master, an older man named Joe, had noticed her steady improvement over the past year, but respected her quiet nature and never pushed for conversation. Sarah's classmates had no idea about her shooting skills. To them, she was just the girl who sat in the back corner, turned in her assignments on time, and never caused any trouble. If they thought about her at all, they probably assumed she spent her weekends reading or doing homework. But Sarah's life was about to change dramatically. Her school had recently announced a new partnership with the local police department's youth outreach program. Officers would be visiting classes to talk about careers in law enforcement and demonstrate various aspects of police work. The announcement hadn't particularly interested Sarah. She had no plans to become a police officer and assumed the presentations would be just another thing to sit through quietly. She had no way of knowing that this program would put her directly in the path of an opportunity that would change everything. As she walked home that afternoon, backpack slung over one shoulder, Sarah looked like any other teenager heading home from school. No one passing her on the sidewalk could have guessed that this quiet, unremarkable girl possessed skills that would soon amaze trained professionals and change her life forever. The workshop awaited her, along with the rifle her grandfather had left behind and the targets she had set up in the backyard. As always, she would spend the evening practicing, alone with her thoughts and the memory of the man who had taught her that sometimes the quietest people had the most to offer the world. Officer Michael Rodriguez had been with the police force for 12 years, and he genuinely enjoyed working with young people. The youth outreach program was his favorite assignment, giving him a chance to show kids that police officers were real people who wanted to help their communities. This particular Tuesday morning, he was scheduled to visit Lincoln High School for a career presentation and hands-on demonstration. He had prepared his usual talk about police work, brought some equipment to show the students, and planned to discuss the various specializations within law enforcement. What made this visit special was the portable shooting simulator he had borrowed from the training academy. The device used laser technology to create realistic shooting scenarios on a large screen, allowing students to experience what it was like to make split-second decisions under pressure. It was safe, educational, and usually got students excited about the precision and responsibility required in police work. Officer Rodriguez arrived at the school early, setting up his equipment in the gymnasium. The simulator looked impressive with its large projection screen and realistic replica firearms that used laser technology instead of bullets. He had used this setup dozens of times at different schools, and it never failed to engage students. The first class filed in around 10 o'clock, a group of about 30 seniors taking a civics course. Officer Rodriguez smiled as he watched them settle into the bleachers, noting the usual mix of eager faces, bored expressions, and students who looked like they would rather be anywhere else. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice carrying easily across the gymnasium. "I'm Officer Rodriguez, and I'm here to talk to you about careers in law enforcement. But before we get into all the serious stuff, who wants to try their hand at some police training?" Several hands shot up immediately, mostly from the more outgoing students. Officer Rodriguez noticed one girl sitting in the back who hadn't raised her hand but was watching the simulator with obvious interest. She was small, with dark hair pulled back simply, and something about her focused attention caught his notice. He started with the eager volunteers, explaining how the simulator worked and what skills it tested. The first few students tried their best, but their results were typical for beginners. The laser shots scattered across the screen, missing the targets by wide margins. Some students laughed at their poor performance while others tried to blame the equipment. "Don't worry," Officer Rodriguez assured them. "This is actually pretty difficult. Most people need lots of practice to get good at this. Even trained officers sometimes struggle when they first try the simulator." More students took turns and the pattern continued. Some came close to hitting the targets, but most missed by significant distances. The exercise was designed to be challenging, teaching students about the difficulty and responsibility of police work rather than just being a game. After about 15 attempts from various students, Officer Rodriguez decided to make his joke. "Got any snipers out there?" he asked with a grin, looking around the room. "Because so far we're not exactly setting any accuracy records here." The comment drew laughter from most of the students, but Officer Rodriguez noticed that the quiet girl in the back didn't laugh. Instead, she seemed to be studying the simulator more intently, as if she was analyzing something the others had missed. Sarah Martinez had been watching carefully as each student took their turn. She noticed how they held the replica rifle, how they aimed, and how their breathing affected their accuracy. Most of them were rushing, excited by the technology and the attention of their classmates. They weren't applying the basic principles her grandfather had taught her. When Officer Rodriguez made his joke about snipers, Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. She knew she could probably do better than the other students, but standing up in front of the class was exactly the kind of attention she had spent years avoiding. Her teacher, Mrs. Chen, had noticed Sarah's intense focus on the demonstration. "Sarah," she called out, "why don't you give it a try? You've been watching very carefully." Suddenly, all eyes in the gymnasium were on Sarah Martinez. Her face flushed red, and she felt the familiar panic that came with unwanted attention. Part of her wanted to decline, to shake her head and let someone else have a turn. But something else stirred inside her, something connected to the memory of her grandfather and all those quiet hours in his workshop. This wasn't about showing off or being the center of attention. This was about honoring what he had taught her, and maybe, just maybe, surprising everyone, including herself. Sarah stood up slowly, her legs feeling unsteady as she made her way down from the bleachers. The gymnasium felt enormous, and she could sense 30 pairs of eyes following her every step. Officer Rodriguez smiled encouragingly as she approached the simulator, having no idea that he was about to witness something extraordinary. As Sarah walked toward the simulator, the gymnasium seemed to grow quieter. Her classmates, who had been chattering and joking during the previous attempts, were now focused on the girl they barely knew. Some were probably surprised she had volunteered at all, given how she usually avoided any kind of spotlight. Officer Rodriguez handed her the laser rifle with the same encouraging smile he had given every student. "Take your time," he said kindly. "Remember, this is just for fun and learning. There's no pressure to hit anything specific." Sarah nodded and accepted the replica weapon. The moment her hands made contact with it, something shifted inside her. The weight felt familiar even though this was just a simulator. It reminded her of the countless hours she had spent with her grandfather's rifle, learning to feel the weapon as an extension of herself rather than just a tool. She positioned herself at the designated spot and looked at the large screen displaying the target scenario. The setup showed a standard police training exercise with multiple targets at various distances. The closest targets were at 100 yards, the furthest at what appeared to be around 400 yards on the simulation scale. While the other students had immediately started shooting, Sarah did something different. She stood still for a long moment, just breathing and observing. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "Patience, mija. The rifle will tell you when it's ready." Officer Rodriguez watched her with growing curiosity. Unlike the other students who had been eager to start shooting immediately, this girl was taking time to actually study the targets and understand the simulation. Her breathing had become slow and controlled, and she held the rifle with a confidence that seemed surprising for someone her size. Sarah raised the rifle slowly, settling it against her shoulder in the exact position her grandfather had taught her. She closed her eyes for just a moment, feeling for that place of perfect stillness inside herself. When she opened them, her focus was complete. The first target was at the simulated distance of 100 yards. Sarah aimed carefully, controlling her breathing just as she had been taught. The crosshairs settled perfectly on the center of the target, and she squeezed the trigger with steady, gentle pressure. The laser struck dead center. A murmur went through the gymnasium, but Sarah didn't hear it. She was already moving to the next target, this one at 200 yards. Again, she took her time, found her breathing rhythm, and fired. Another perfect center hit. Now the murmur became excited whispers. Officer Rodriguez found himself leaning forward, suddenly very interested in what he was witnessing. In 12 years of using this simulator with students, he had never seen accuracy like this. Sarah continued methodically through the targets. 250 yards, center hit. 300 yards, center hit. Each shot was placed with mechanical precision, as if the simulator was malfunctioning and defaulting to perfect accuracy. But Officer Rodriguez knew the equipment was working perfectly. What he was watching was genuine skill, the kind that usually took years of intensive training to develop. He glanced at Mrs. Chen, who looked as amazed as he felt. The furthest target appeared on the screen, marked at 400 yards in the simulation. This was the distance that often challenged even experienced officers. The target looked small on the screen, a difficult shot that required exceptional skill and concentration. Sarah didn't hesitate. She had been building up to this moment through each previous shot, finding her rhythm and settling into the zone her grandfather had taught her to access. The rifle felt perfectly balanced in her hands, and her breathing was completely controlled. She aimed, adjusted slightly for the simulated distance and wind conditions displayed on the screen, and fired. Perfect center hit. The gymnasium erupted. Students who had been watching in growing amazement were now on their feet, cheering and applauding. Some were shouting questions. Others were just staring in disbelief. The quiet girl they had barely noticed for 4 years had just demonstrated shooting skills that seemed almost supernatural. Officer Rodriguez stood frozen for a moment, his mind processing what he had just witnessed. In his years of law enforcement, he had known many excellent marksmen, including SWAT team snipers and competitive shooters. What he had just seen would have been impressive coming from any of them. Coming from a 17-year-old high school student, it was extraordinary. Sarah lowered the rifle and stepped back from the simulator, her face flushed but calm. The attention was overwhelming, but she felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with impressing her classmates. She had honored her grandfather's training and proven to herself that his lessons lived on through her. "That was incredible," Officer Rodriguez said, his voice filled with genuine amazement. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "My grandfather taught me," Sarah replied quietly, her voice barely audible over the continuing excitement of her classmates. "He was in the military." Officer Rodriguez nodded, understanding beginning to dawn on him. Military training would explain the technique, but not the exceptional natural ability he had just witnessed. This girl had something special, something that couldn't be taught. As the class period wound down and students began filing out, still buzzing with excitement about what they had seen, Officer Rodriguez made a decision that would change Sarah's life forever. Officer Rodriguez approached Sarah as she was gathering her backpack, most of her classmates having already left for their next period. The excitement in the gymnasium was finally dying down, but he could still hear students talking animatedly in the hallway about what they had witnessed. "Sarah, right?" he asked, consulting the class roster Mrs. Chen had given him. When she nodded, he continued, "I'd like to talk with you for a moment, if that's okay. What you just did was truly exceptional." Sarah felt the familiar anxiety of being singled out, but something in Officer Rodriguez's tone was different from the usual adult attention she tried to avoid. He seemed genuinely interested rather than just making polite conversation. "I'm serious about this," Officer Rodriguez continued, sensing her discomfort. "In my 12 years as a police officer, I've worked with some of the best marksmen in the state. SWAT team snipers, competitive shooters, military veterans. What you just demonstrated would be impressive coming from any of them." He paused, letting that sink in before asking, "Has anyone ever talked to you about competitive shooting? Or maybe specialized training programs?" Sarah shook her head. The idea had never occurred to her. Shooting had always been something private, a way to connect with her grandfather's memory and find peace in the precision he had taught her. She had never thought of it as a skill that might lead somewhere. "Well, I think they should have," Officer Rodriguez said firmly. "Look, I don't want to overwhelm you, but I know some people who would be very interested in meeting you. There are programs, scholarships, opportunities that most people never even hear about." Mrs. Chen, who had been listening to the conversation, joined them. "Officer Rodriguez, are you saying that Sarah's performance was really that unusual?" "Unusual doesn't begin to cover it," he replied. "What I just saw was the kind of natural ability that shows up maybe once in a decade. Combined with clearly excellent training, it's remarkable." Sarah found her voice, though it was still quiet. "What kind of opportunities?" Officer Rodriguez smiled, pleased that she was showing interest. "Well, there are several directions this could go. College shooting teams offer full scholarships to students with your level of skill. The military has specialized programs for exceptional marksmen. Law enforcement agencies are always looking for people with natural shooting ability." He pulled out his business card and wrote something on the back. "But before we get ahead of ourselves, I'd like you to meet someone. Captain Jennifer Walsh runs our department's tactical training program. She's also a former Olympic shooting coach. Would you be willing to demonstrate your skills for her?" Sarah hesitated. The idea of performing for more strangers was terrifying, but something about the opportunity felt important. It felt like something her grandfather would have encouraged her to pursue. "You don't have to decide right now," Officer Rodriguez said, understanding her uncertainty. "Talk it over with your parents. But Sarah, please don't let this opportunity pass by. Talent like yours shouldn't be hidden." That evening, Sarah sat at the dinner table with her parents, trying to explain what had happened at school. Maria and Carlos Martinez listened with growing amazement as their quiet daughter described the day's events. "You hit all the targets?" Carlos asked, still processing the story. "Every single one?" Sarah nodded. "It wasn't that hard. Grandpa taught me well." Maria looked thoughtful. "Your grandfather always said you had a gift, but we never really understood what he meant." The business card Officer Rodriguez had given Sarah sat on the table between them. On the back he had written, "Captain Walsh, Tactical Training. Call any time. Sarah has extraordinary potential." "What do you want to do, mija?" Carlos asked gently. "This policeman, he thinks this could lead to something important?" Sarah had been thinking about that question all afternoon. For so long, she had been content to be invisible, to practice her skills in private and avoid drawing attention to herself. But something had changed today. When she had held that rifle and made those shots in front of her classmates, she had felt a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. "I think Grandpa would want me to try," she said finally. "He always taught me that skills should be used, not just practiced." Her parents exchanged a look. They had always been proud of Sarah's good grades and quiet behavior, but they had sometimes worried that she was too withdrawn, too willing to fade into the background. If this opportunity could help her find confidence and direction, they wanted to support it. "Then we'll call this Captain Walsh," Maria said decisively. "We'll see what she has to say." The next morning at school, word of Sarah's performance had spread throughout Lincoln High. Students who had never spoken to her before were approaching her in the hallways, asking questions about her shooting abilities. Some seemed genuinely impressed. Others were simply curious about the quiet girl who had suddenly become famous. Sarah found the attention overwhelming, but she also noticed something else. For the first time in her high school career, she was being seen as someone with a special talent rather than just the girl who kept to herself. It was strange, but not entirely unpleasant. During lunch, she found herself sitting with a group of students she had never really talked to before. They peppered her with questions about her grandfather, her training, and what it felt like to be so accurate with a rifle. "Are you going to join the police force?" asked Jessica, a girl from her English class. "Or maybe the military," added Marcus, who had been one of the students cheering loudest in the gymnasium. Sarah realized she didn't have answers to these questions yet. Yesterday, her future had seemed predictable and quiet. Now, suddenly, there were possibilities she had never considered opening up before her. That afternoon, Maria Martinez called the number on Officer Rodriguez's business card. Captain Jennifer Walsh was intrigued from the moment Officer Rodriguez called her about Sarah Martinez. In her 15 years with the police department and previous career as an Olympic shooting coach, she had encountered many talented marksmen, but Rodriguez's description of Sarah's performance was extraordinary. "You're absolutely certain about the distances?" Captain Walsh asked during their phone conversation. "All targets hit dead center, including the 400-yard simulation?" "I watched every shot," Rodriguez confirmed. "And Jennifer, it wasn't just the accuracy. It was the technique, the breathing control, the way she approached each target methodically. This girl has had serious training from somewhere." Captain Walsh agreed to meet with Sarah and her family at the police department's training facility the following Saturday. She was curious to see if the performance could be replicated under different conditions, and with real firearms rather than a simulator. When Saturday arrived, Sarah felt nervous as she walked into the police training facility with her parents. The building was larger and more imposing than she had expected, filled with the sounds of officers practicing various skills. She carried her grandfather's rifle case, having been told to bring her own equipment if she had it. Captain Walsh greeted them in the lobby, a tall woman with graying hair and kind but assessing eyes. She had the bearing of someone accustomed to command, but her smile was warm as she shook hands. "With each family member, so you're the young lady who's been impressing my officers," she said to Sarah. "I'm looking forward to seeing what you can do." She led them to an outdoor shooting range behind the main building. The facility was professional grade, with targets set up at various distances from 100 to 500 yards. Sarah noticed several other officers practicing at different stations, their attention focused on their own training. "Officer Rodriguez told me about your grandfather," Captain Walsh said as Sarah unpacked her rifle. "Military training?" "Vietnam War," Sarah replied quietly. "He was a Marine sniper, but he didn't talk about it much. He just taught me the basics. Breathing, patience, precision." Captain Walsh nodded with understanding. "The basics are everything. You can have all the fancy equipment in the world, but without proper fundamentals, none of it matters." She gestured toward the range. "I've set up targets at 100, 200, 300, 400, and 500 yards. Take your time, shoot when you're ready. There's no pressure here, I just want to see your natural ability." Sarah approached the shooting position, feeling more comfortable now that she was holding her grandfather's familiar rifle. This felt more real than the simulator, more connected to all those hours of practice in her backyard. She loaded 5 rounds and settled into position for the first target at 100 yards. The outdoor conditions were different from the controlled environment of the gymnasium. There was a slight breeze, and the natural lighting created different shadows on the targets. Her first shot struck slightly left of center. Sarah made a mental adjustment for the wind conditions and fired again, this time dead center. The next 3 shots grouped tightly around the bullseye. "Excellent adaptation," Captain Walsh murmured to herself, making notes on a clipboard. Sarah moved to the 200-yard target, then 300 yards. Each distance required slight adjustments for wind and drop, but she handled them instinctively, the way her grandfather had taught her. Her shots consistently found their marks with impressive accuracy. At 400 yards, the target was becoming challenging, even for experienced shooters. Sarah took extra time, reading the wind conditions and adjusting her aim accordingly. Her shot struck just inside the center ring. "Outstanding," Captain Walsh said, no longer trying to hide her amazement. Sarah, I want you to try the 500-yard target, but first, let me ask you something. Have you ever shot at this distance before? Sarah shook her head. Grandpa's backyard wasn't big enough. The farthest I've practiced is about 300 yards. Captain Walsh exchanged a meaningful look with Officer Rodriguez, who had arrived to observe the session. If Sarah could perform well at 500 yards without prior experience at that distance, it would confirm that her abilities were truly exceptional. The 500-yard target looked tiny through the rifle scope. Sarah spent several minutes studying the wind conditions, watching how the flags along the range moved and calculating the adjustments she would need to make. This was beyond anything her grandfather had specifically taught her, but the principles he had instilled were still applicable. She settled into her shooting position, controlled her breathing, and made her best estimate of the necessary adjustments. The shot felt good as it left the rifle, but at this distance it would take nearly a full second for the bullet to reach the target. Through the spotting scope, Captain Walsh watched the target. "Impact," she called out. "Center ring." A murmur went through the small group of officers who had gathered to watch. Word was already spreading through the facility about the teenage girl who was outperforming many of their trained marksmen. Sarah fired 4 more rounds at the 500-yard target. 3 more center hits and 1 just outside the center ring, a grouping that would have been respectable for a trained police sniper. Captain Walsh was quiet for a long moment after Sarah finished shooting. She had seen enough to confirm what Officer Rodriguez had told her, but witnessing it firsthand was still remarkable. "Sarah," she said finally, "I need to ask you a serious question. What are your plans after high school?" Sarah looked uncertain. "I'm not sure. College, I guess. I have good grades, but I haven't really decided on a major." Captain Walsh nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I think it's time we talked about some options you might not have considered. Your level of natural ability, combined with proper training, could open doors you probably don't even know exist." She paused, organizing her thoughts. "There are college programs that would offer you full scholarships just for your shooting skills. Military academies that would be very interested in recruiting someone with your talent. Professional shooting circuits where you could compete at the highest levels." Sarah's parents had been listening quietly, but now Carlos spoke up. "What exactly are you suggesting, Captain?" Captain Walsh smiled. "I'm suggesting that your daughter has a gift that shouldn't be wasted. With the right guidance and training, she could go anywhere she wants to go." The weeks following Sarah's demonstration at the police training facility became a whirlwind of opportunities and decisions. Captain Walsh had made several phone calls, and suddenly Sarah found herself at the center of attention from organizations she had never heard of. The first call came from the University of Texas shooting team coach, who offered Sarah a full athletic scholarship based solely on Captain Walsh's recommendation, and a video of her shooting session. The second call was from a Marine Corps recruiter, who had heard about her performance through military channels and wanted to discuss officer training programs. Most surprising of all was the invitation from the U.S. Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. They wanted Sarah to attend a youth development camp where the country's most promising young shooters were evaluated for potential Olympic team membership. "I can't believe this is happening," Sarah told her parents one evening as they sat around the dinner table, surrounded by brochures and information packets from various organizations. 3 weeks ago, nobody even knew I existed." Maria Martinez looked at her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "It's wonderful, Mija, but it's also overwhelming. How do we know which path is right for you?" Captain Walsh had become an unofficial advisor, helping the family navigate the sudden interest in Sarah's abilities. She had arranged for Sarah to spend time with different shooting disciplines to help her understand her options. At the local Olympic training facility, Sarah tried competitive rifle shooting under controlled indoor conditions. The precision required was different from what she was used to, but she adapted quickly. The coaches were impressed by her natural steadiness and ability to perform under the pressure of being observed and timed. She also spent a day with the police SWAT team, learning about tactical shooting and real-world applications of marksmanship skills. The scenarios were more dynamic and challenging than target shooting, requiring quick decisions and adaptability. Again, Sarah demonstrated an intuitive understanding that impressed the experienced officers, but it was during a visit to a military base that Sarah felt the strongest connection to her grandfather's legacy. The Marine shooting instructors treated her with the same serious respect they showed their own trainees, and she could almost feel Roberto's presence as she worked with the rifles he would have been familiar with. "Your grandfather would be proud," Sergeant Martinez told her after watching her shoot. Interestingly, he shared the same last name as Sarah's family, though they weren't related. That kind of natural ability combined with proper military training could take you places most people only dream of. High school had become a strange experience for Sarah. Her newfound fame had completely changed how her classmates interacted with her. Some were genuinely supportive and excited about her opportunities, while others seemed resentful that the quiet girl they had ignored was suddenly special. Her grades remained excellent, but Sarah found it harder to concentrate on regular coursework when she was constantly thinking about her future options. Her guidance counselor, Mrs. Peterson, had initially been skeptical about the sudden interest in Sarah's shooting abilities, but the legitimate scholarship offers had convinced her that this was a real opportunity. "You have choices that most students would envy," Mrs. Peterson told her during a counseling session. "But that also means you have to be very careful about making the right decision for your long-term goals." Sarah appreciated the guidance, but she was struggling with a question that no one else seemed to understand. For years, shooting had been her private connection to her grandfather, a quiet activity that brought her peace and helped her feel close to his memory. Now it was becoming public, competitive, and potentially the foundation of her entire future. During one of their regular practice sessions at the range, Captain Walsh noticed Sarah's conflicted mood. "You're thinking too much," she observed after Sarah's shooting was slightly off her usual standards. "How do I know if I'm doing this for the right reasons?" Sarah asked, lowering her rifle. "What if I'm just good at this because it was always private and peaceful? What if making it into a career ruins that?" Captain Walsh set down her own equipment and gave Sarah her full attention. "That's a very mature question, and honestly, it's something every serious shooter has to consider. But let me ask you something. What do you think your grandfather would want for you?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "He'd want me to use the gifts I have to help people and make a difference. And do you think any of these opportunities would allow you to do that?" Sarah nodded slowly. The military programs talked about service and protection. The police applications involved keeping communities safe. Even the Olympic path could inspire other young people and represent her country on an international stage. "But there's another question you need to answer," Captain Walsh continued. "Are you ready to stop being invisible? Because once you commit to this path, wherever it leads, you'll never be the quiet girl in the back of the room again." That evening, Sarah sat in her grandfather's workshop, surrounded by his tools and the memories of all the lessons he had taught her. She held his old rifle across her lap, feeling the familiar weight and balance that had become such a comfort to her. On the workbench in front of her were application materials for 3 different programs: the University of Texas Shooting Team, the Marine Corps Officer Candidate Program, and the Olympic Development Camp. Each represented a completely different future, but all of them would require her to step out of the shadows and embrace the public recognition of her abilities. Sarah thought about the 15 students who had missed their targets in the gymnasium, and Officer Rodriguez's joking question about snipers. She thought about the amazement in Captain Walsh's voice when she had hit the 500-yard target. Most of all, she thought about her grandfather's patient teaching, and his belief that skills should be shared, not hidden. For the first time since this journey began, Sarah felt a sense of clarity about what she wanted to do. The decision wouldn't be about which program offered the best opportunities or which path seemed safest. It would be about honoring the legacy of the man who had taught her that quiet strength could be just as powerful as loud confidence. As she sat in the workshop where it all began, Sarah Martinez finally understood what her next step would be. Sarah's decision surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of choosing just one path, she decided to pursue a combination that would honor different aspects of her grandfather's legacy while building toward a future that felt authentically her own. She accepted the University of Texas Shooting Team scholarship, but deferred enrollment for 1 year. During that gap year, she would attend the Olympic Development Camp and complete a civilian marksmanship instructor certification program. After college, she planned to pursue the Marine Corps officer program, following more directly in her grandfather's footsteps. "It's unconventional," Captain Walsh admitted when Sarah explained her plan, "but it shows remarkable maturity. You're not rushing into anything. and you're giving yourself time to develop different aspects of your abilities. The Olympic Development Camp in Colorado Springs was Sarah's first experience living away from home. The facility was impressive, filled with the country's most promising young athletes in various shooting disciplines. For the first time in her life, Sarah was surrounded by people who understood her passion for precision and accuracy. Her roommate was Amanda Chen, a 16-year-old pistol shooter from California, who had been competing nationally since she was 12. Amanda was everything Sarah wasn't: outgoing, confident, and comfortable with the spotlight that came with high-level competition. "You're really the girl who just started shooting competitively?" Amanda asked on their first night, looking at Sarah with curiosity. "Everyone's talking about your scores from the evaluation today. Some of the coaches are saying you have natural ability they've never seen before." Sarah felt the familiar discomfort of being discussed, but Amanda's tone was friendly rather than competitive. "I've been shooting for years, just not in competitions." "Well, you're going to have to get used to people talking about you," Amanda said with a grin. "When you're good at something like this, privacy becomes a luxury you can't afford." The training at the Olympic Center was intensive and eye-opening. Sarah learned about different shooting disciplines she had never tried, from precision air rifle to rapid-fire pistol events. The coaches pushed her technically, helping her refine aspects of her technique that her grandfather's basic training hadn't covered. More importantly, she learned about the mental game of competitive shooting, the ability to perform under pressure, with cameras recording and spectators watching, was a skill entirely separate from pure marksmanship ability. "Your grandfather taught you to shoot," explained Coach Rebecca Martinez, the head rifle instructor. "Now we need to teach you to compete." The difference became apparent during Sarah's first simulated competition. Surrounded by other shooters with timers and scoreboards and observers taking notes, her performance dropped noticeably. The shots were still accurate, but not with the mechanical precision she had demonstrated in quieter settings. "It's normal," Coach Martinez assured her after reviewing her scores. "Even experienced competitors struggle with pressure. The fact that you're still shooting better than most of our advanced students shows how strong your foundation is." Over the weeks at camp, Sarah gradually adapted to the competitive environment. She learned breathing techniques for managing anxiety, visualization exercises for maintaining focus, and strategies for blocking out distractions. Slowly, her competition scores began to approach her practice performance, but the most valuable lesson came from an unexpected source. During the final week of camp, the athletes were visited by retired Marine Colonel James Thompson, who had been a competitive shooter before his military career and again after retirement. "I knew your grandfather," he told Sarah during a private conversation. "Roberto Martinez, Vietnam-era Marine sniper. We served in different units, but the shooting community was small in those days." Sarah's eyes widened. "You knew Grandpa?" Colonel Thompson nodded. He was legendary for his patience and precision. But what made him truly special wasn't just his shooting ability, it was his character. He understood that marksmanship is about responsibility, not just skill. He paused, studying Sarah carefully. "Roberto would be proud of what you've accomplished, but he'd want to make sure you understand something important. Talent is a gift, but what you do with it is a choice. Every shot you take, whether in competition or service, represents the values he taught you." Those words stayed with Sarah throughout the remainder of the camp and into her gap year. She returned home with new technical skills and a better understanding of competitive shooting, but also with a deeper appreciation for the responsibility that came with her abilities. The instructor certification program she completed that fall taught her how to pass on the skills her grandfather had given her. Working with new shooters, many of them struggling with basic concepts that seemed intuitive to her, helped Sarah understand the gift she had been given and the importance of sharing it. When she finally enrolled at the University of Texas the following year, Sarah Martinez was no longer the invisible girl from Lincoln High School. She was a nationally ranked competitive shooter, a certified instructor, and someone with clear goals for her future. The university shooting team welcomed her as a star recruit, but Sarah brought something more valuable than just high scores. She brought the patience and teaching ability that her grandfather had modeled, helping younger team members develop their skills and confidence. Her academic performance remained excellent, and she chose to major in criminal justice with a minor in psychology, preparing for her eventual military career. But she also made time to volunteer at local youth programs, teaching basic marksmanship skills to young people who reminded her of herself at that age. 2 years into college, Sarah received a letter that meant more to her than any trophy or scholarship. It was from Marcus, one of her former classmates from Lincoln High School, who had enlisted in the Army after graduation. "Sarah," he wrote, "I wanted you to know that watching you find your courage that day in the gymnasium inspired me to find mine too. I was always afraid to pursue my dreams, but seeing you step up and show what you could do made me realize that sometimes we all have abilities we don't know about until we're brave enough to try. Thank you for showing us that quiet strength can be just as powerful as any other kind." As Sarah read the letter in her dorm room, surrounded by shooting trophies and academic achievements, she finally understood the full impact of that moment when Officer Rodriguez had joked about snipers. It hadn't just changed her life. It had given her the opportunity to inspire others to discover their own hidden strengths. Her grandfather's workshop still waited for her during visits home, filled with his tools and the memories of all he had taught her. But now it also held something new. A display case with photos from her competitions, letters from young people she had taught, and a framed copy of her instructor certification. Roberto Martinez's legacy lived on, not just in the precision of his granddaughter's shooting, but in the quiet confidence she had found and the courage she inspired in others. The girl who had once hidden in the back of the classroom was now stepping forward to lead, carrying forward the values of patience, precision, and service that had been planted in a workshop behind a small house by a grandfather who believed that the quietest people often had the most to offer the world. Sarah Martinez had found her voice, and it spoke in the language her grandfather had taught her, through example, through service, and through the understanding that true strength doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it whispers, and in that whisper, others find the courage to discover their own extraordinary potential.